The Louisiana sun beat down mercilessly on Fort Jackson Military Academy's parade ground as hundreds of cadets assembled for the annual Valor Day ceremony. The air hung thick and humid, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass and polished leather. 22-year-old Cadet Marcus Webb stood in formation, his uniform crisp, his posture perfect, his mind already imagining the scholarship announcement he expected to receive. "Another boring ceremony," he muttered to his friend beside him. 3 hours of watching old guys talk about wars nobody remembers. The brass band struck up a patriotic march as distinguished guests began filing onto the stage. Retired generals with chests full of medals, local politicians in expensive suits, corporate sponsors clutching oversized checks for the Academy's scholarship fund. Then Marcus noticed him. An elderly man shuffled across the grass toward the back row of guest seating, moving slowly, one hand gripping a worn wooden cane. He wore a faded jean jacket over a simple white shirt, khaki pants that had seen better days, and scuffed work boots. His weathered face was deeply lined, his silver hair thinning. He looked to be in his late 70s, maybe early 80s. "Who invited the janitor?" Marcus whispered loud enough for the cadets around him to hear. Snickers rippled through the formation. The old man found a plastic folding chair at the far end of the guest section, separate from the VIP seating. He lowered himself carefully into it, wincing slightly as he settled his weight. "Probably wandered in looking for the senior center," another cadet joked. More laughter. Marcus felt emboldened by his audience. "Someone should tell him the soup kitchen is across town." The old man seemed oblivious to the whispers, his eyes fixed straight ahead, his calloused hands resting on the head of his cane. There was something about his stillness that struck Marcus as odd, but he pushed the thought away. Academy Commandant Colonel Patricia Harrison approached the podium, her dress uniform immaculate, her bearing commanding instant silence. "Cadets, honored guests, faculty, welcome to the 47th Annual Valor Day ceremony." Marcus suppressed a yawn. Same speech every year. Honor, duty, service. He'd heard it all before. "Today we celebrate those who answered the call when their communities needed them most," Colonel Harrison continued. "But before we present this year's scholarships, I want to share a story many of you have never heard." A large screen descended behind the podium, and grainy footage appeared. News coverage from 2005, floodwaters, rooftops, helicopters, the unmistakable devastation of Hurricane Katrina. Marcus's attention sharpened slightly. He'd heard stories about Katrina his entire life, growing up in Louisiana. August 29, 2005, the colonel said. "A devastating hurricane makes landfall, levees fail, 80% of New Orleans floods, thousands trapped. But while government response faltered, ordinary citizens became extraordinary heroes. The footage showed rescue boats navigating through submerged neighborhoods, people on rooftops waving desperately for help. One man, recently retired from the Coast Guard, owned a small fishing boat," Colonel Harrison said. "For 6 straight days, he navigated those deadly floodwaters. No sleep, barely any food. Just him, his boat, and his determination to save every life he could reach." More footage, close-ups of terrified families being pulled from attics, elderly people clinging to debris, children crying, and in many of the shots, barely visible, the back of a man in a rain-soaked shirt piloting a small aluminum boat. "He pulled 87 people from certain death," the colonel continued, her voice catching slightly. 87 souls who went home to their families because one man refused to stop. He broke 3 ribs when a floating car struck his boat. He developed pneumonia from the contaminated water. He nearly drowned twice when debris capsized him. The footage showed a brief interview with the man, his face younger but recognizable even through the exhaustion and dirt. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. That man received no medal, no national recognition, No parade. He went back to his small apartment, recovered from his injuries, and returned to his quiet life as a dock worker. He never sought attention for what he did. Colonel Harrison's eyes swept across the assembled cadets, and Marcus felt his throat tightening. "That man," she said slowly, deliberately, "is here with us today." The old man in the faded jean jacket rose slowly from his plastic chair. The parade ground fell into absolute silence as the old man stood, his cane supporting his weight. Marcus felt his face burning, his heart hammering against his ribs. Around him, cadets who had been laughing minutes ago now stood frozen, their expressions shifting from confusion to dawning horror. "Mr. Thomas Ray Porter," Colonel Harrison said, her voice carrying across the field with crystal clarity. "Would you please join me on stage?" The old man began his slow walk toward the podium. Each step seemed to take enormous effort. His limp was pronounced, his breathing audible even from yards away. The only sound was the tap of his cane against the concrete pathway and the distant call of a mockingbird in the live oak trees lining the academy grounds. Marcus wanted to disappear, to melt into the ground. His mind replayed every cruel word he'd said, every laugh he'd encouraged, the janitor comment, the soup kitchen joke. His chest felt tight, like someone was squeezing his lungs. As Thomas reached the stairs leading to the stage, Colonel Harrison descended to meet him, offering her arm. He waved her off gently with a small smile, tackling each step on his own, his jaw set with determination. When he finally reached the podium, she saluted him sharply. He returned it with the practiced precision of someone who'd done it thousands of times before. "Thank you for being here, Mr. Porter," she said softly into the microphone. "Happy to be here, Colonel," Thomas replied, his voice gravelly but steady. His Louisiana accent was thick, comforting somehow, though I'm not sure what all this fuss is about. A nervous laugh rippled through the crowd. Marcus didn't join it. He felt sick. Colonel Harrison turned back to the assembly. "Mr. Porter never submitted his story to any news outlet, never applied for veteran benefits for his Katrina injuries, never sought recognition. We only learned about his heroism because 3 years ago, one of our graduating cadets was researching the Katrina response for a history thesis." She gestured to a young woman in officer's uniform standing near the stage. Lieutenant Jessica Moreau discovered that her entire family, 15 people trapped in an attic in the 9th Ward, were among those 87 souls Mr. Porter saved. She was 4 years old at the time. Lieutenant Moreau approached the microphone, tears streaming down her face. "I wouldn't be here today without this man. My mother, my grandmother, my baby brother, my aunt who was pregnant, my cousins. We would have died that day. The water was rising. We were running out of air in that attic." She turned to Thomas, her voice breaking. "You came back 3 times for us. The first trip you could only take 5. You promised you'd return, and we thought you were just saying that because everyone else had promised help and no one came. But you came back twice more, through that hell. You wouldn't leave until every single one of us was safe." Thomas's weathered face remained impassive, but Marcus could see his throat working, his eyes glistening. "My mother tried to pay you," Jessica continued. "She offered you everything she had left. You refused. You just said, 'That's what neighbors do,' and you moved on to the next house." The screen behind them shifted to recent photographs. Thomas in his small apartment, sitting on a worn couch. Thomas at a dock, repairing fishing nets. Thomas at a VA clinic, waiting for an appointment. Simple, humble moments of an ordinary life. "Mr. Porter lives on his modest Coast Guard pension and occasional dock work," Colonel Harrison said. "He suffers from chronic pneumonia, arthritis in both knees from the cold floodwater exposure, and persistent nightmares. He's had 6 surgeries to repair damage from his Katrina injuries. He's never married, never had children. He lives alone." Marcus felt tears burning his eyes. He'd called this hero a janitor, had mocked him for his simple clothes, his slow walk, his age. Today, Colonel Harrison announced, we're establishing the Thomas Ray Porter Scholarship Fund, a full ride to any cadet who demonstrates exceptional courage and selfless service to their community. And Mr. Porter, whether you want it or not, we're also presenting you with the Academy's highest civilian honor, the Cross of Valor. Applause erupted, but Marcus couldn't clap. His hands hung uselessly at his sides. Thomas accepted the medal with quiet dignity, then stepped to the microphone. I appreciate this, he said slowly, but I didn't do anything special. When you see someone drowning, you don't think about it. You just reach for them. That's all I did. Reached for folks who needed reaching. His eyes scanned the assembled cadets, and for one terrible moment, Marcus was certain Thomas's gaze landed directly on him. You young people here, training to serve. You'll face moments when everything's chaos, when you're scared, when you're hurting, when it would be easier to look away. That's when you find out who you are, not in the easy moments, in the hard ones. Marcus's throat burned. The old man wasn't angry, wasn't accusing, was just speaking truth with the calm authority of someone who'd lived it. Do the right thing even when nobody's watching, Thomas concluded. Especially when nobody's watching. That's all that matters in the end. The ceremony continued with scholarship announcements, but Marcus couldn't focus. His mind kept replaying his cruel comments, seeing them now against the backdrop of Thomas's quiet heroism. When his name was called for the Academic Excellence Scholarship, he walked to the stage, feeling none of the pride he'd anticipated. Colonel Harrison shook his hand, but her eyes held a coolness that hadn't been there before. As Marcus returned to formation, he noticed several faculty members watching him with obvious disappointment. Word had spread quickly about the comments during the ceremony. In a place built on honor and respect, his behavior had been the opposite of everything the Academy stood for. When the ceremony finally ended, the cadets dispersed toward the dining hall for the reception. Marcus hung back, watching as distinguished guests surrounded Thomas, thanking him, shaking his hand. Lieutenant Moreau stood beside him, her hand on his shoulder, introducing him to her fellow officers. Marcus knew what he had to do. His stomach churned with shame, but he forced his feet to move toward the small crowd around Thomas. As he approached, several cadets who'd laughed at his earlier jokes deliberately turned their backs to him. The message was clear. He waited at the edge of the group, his scholarship certificate clutched in his sweating hands, until the crowd thinned. Finally, only Lieutenant Moreau remained with Thomas, helping him toward a golf cart that would drive him to the parking lot. Mr. Porter, Marcus called out, his voice cracking slightly. Sir, could I speak with you for a moment? Thomas turned slowly, his expression neutral. Up close, Marcus could see the deep lines around his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands, the way he leaned heavily on his cane. This was a man whose body bore the permanent cost of his choices. I'm Cadet Marcus Webb, he began, then stopped, unsure how to continue. Lieutenant Moreau's eyes were hard, her jaw tight. She knew. Of course she knew. I heard you earlier, Thomas said quietly, saving Marcus from having to confess. Before the ceremony. Marcus felt his face burning with shame. Sir, there's no excuse. I was cruel and disrespectful. I judged you based on your appearance without knowing anything about you. I'm deeply sorry. The words felt inadequate, hollow. How could an apology possibly make up for mocking a man who'd risked everything to save lives? Thomas studied him for a long moment, his faded blue eyes sharp despite his age. You know what bothered me most about what you said? Marcus shook his head, unable to speak. Not that you judged me, young folks do that. That's part of learning. What bothered me was how easy it was for you. How quickly the other cadets followed your lead. How comfortable you all were, laughing at someone you saw as beneath you. Each word landed like a physical blow. Marcus wanted to defend himself, to explain, but Thomas wasn't finished. In that attic in the 9th Ward, there was a man who'd been a corporate executive, made more money in a month than I'd seen in a year. Next to him was a woman who cleaned hotel rooms, a teenager who'd been in a gang, a grandmother who'd taught Sunday school for 40 years. You know what they all had in common when that water was rising? Marcus shook his head again. They were all just people who needed help. Their clothes didn't matter. Their bank accounts didn't matter. Their past mistakes didn't matter. They were human beings in trouble, and that was enough. Thomas shifted his weight, wincing slightly. You're going to be an officer someday, son. You're going to lead people. Some of them will come from wealthy families. Some will be barely literate kids from rural towns. Some will have college degrees, and some will have criminal records they're trying to outrun. Your job is to see past all that, to see the person, to see their worth. I understand, sir, Marcus whispered. I failed that test today. Yes, you did, Thomas agreed bluntly. Question is, what are you going to do about it? Marcus looked down at the scholarship certificate in his hands. Academic excellence. He'd worked hard for it, earned it through late nights and disciplined study, but standing before this man who embodied true excellence, the paper felt meaningless. I don't know, Marcus admitted. Tell me what I should do. Thomas leaned more heavily on his cane, and Lieutenant Moreau moved to support his elbow. That's not for me to say, but I'll tell you what I learned in those 6 days during Katrina. Character isn't what you are when everything's going right. It's what you become when you're tested. You failed one test today. There'll be others. Make sure you pass the next one. He turned toward the golf cart, then paused. And son, that scholarship you're holding, it's named after a lot of people who did extraordinary things. Don't waste their legacy by being ordinary in the worst ways. Be ordinary in the best ways. Be decent. Be humble. Be someone who reaches for people when they're drowning. 3 weeks later, Marcus stood in Colonel Harrison's office, his dress uniform pressed, his posture rigid. He'd requested this meeting, though his hands had shaken when he'd submitted the paperwork. At ease, Cadet Webb, the colonel said, gesturing to a chair. I understand you have something you want to discuss. Marcus remained standing. Ma'am, I want to donate my academic excellence scholarship to the Thomas Ray Porter Scholarship Fund. Colonel Harrison's eyebrows rose. That's a $15,000 scholarship, Cadet. Are you certain? Yes, ma'am. I spoke with my parents. They support the decision. I'll take out loans for my remaining tuition. I need to do this. The colonel studied him for a long moment. This is about the ceremony. Yes, ma'am. And no, ma'am. Marcus took a breath. It's about understanding what excellence actually means. I've been chasing awards and recognition my whole time here, thinking that made me exceptional. But Mr. Porter showed me that real excellence is about who you are when nobody's giving you a medal for it. Donating your scholarship is admirable, Cadet Webb, but it doesn't erase what happened. I know, Mom. That's not why I'm doing it. I'm doing it because Mr. Porter's scholarship should be funded by people who understand its meaning, and I need to prove to myself that I understand it. Colonel Harrison nodded slowly. I'll approve the transfer, but I'm also assigning you to the community service program for the remainder of the semester. Every weekend, you'll volunteer at the Veterans Rehabilitation Center. You'll see what sacrifice actually looks like. Thank you, ma'am. Dismissed, Cadet. Marcus turned to leave, then hesitated. Ma'am, do you have contact information for Mr. Porter? I'd like to write to him, if that's appropriate. I'll forward your request to Lieutenant Moreau. She's been checking on him regularly. The colonel's expression softened slightly. He's a good man, Cadet Webb. Learn from him. 6 months later, Marcus found himself at the Port of New Orleans, helping unload supplies for a veterans charity event. The work was hot, exhausting, and exactly what he needed. He'd been corresponding with Thomas regularly, brief letters where the old man shared stories from his Coast Guard days and offered quiet wisdom. "Need a hand with that?" a familiar gravelly voice asked. Marcus turned to find Thomas approaching slowly, wearing work clothes and his ever-present cane. His face looked thinner than Marcus remembered, more tired, but his eyes held warmth. "Mr. Porter, what are you doing here?" "I volunteer here sometimes. Keep my hands busy." Thomas gestured toward the dock. "Heard they needed help today." They worked side by side for the next 2 hours, Thomas directing while Marcus did the heavy lifting. During breaks, Thomas told stories about his Coast Guard years, about the waters he'd navigated, the storms he'd weathered. He never mentioned Katrina unless Marcus asked directly. As the sun began setting over the Mississippi, painting the water gold and orange, they sat on the dock together, legs dangling over the edge. "You're doing good work, son," Thomas said. "Jessica tells me you're different now, more thoughtful, more present." Marcus nodded. "I'm trying. Some days are easier than others. That's life. The trying is what counts." Thomas was quiet for a moment, then added, "You know, I wasn't always the man you met at that ceremony. When I was your age, I was arrogant, thought I knew everything, thought I was better than folks who hadn't accomplished what I had." Marcus looked at him in surprise. "Coast Guard humbled me," Thomas continued. "First real rescue I did, I froze. 19 years old, and I froze when it mattered. My senior chief, he pulled that drowning man out himself, then took me aside and said something I never forgot. He said, 'Porter, courage isn't never being scared. It's being scared and reaching anyway.'" "Is that what you thought about during Katrina?" Thomas smiled faintly. "During Katrina, I didn't think much at all. I just kept seeing faces in windows, kept hearing voices calling for help. My body wanted to quit, but something deeper kept my hands on that motor, kept my boat moving forward. Maybe that was my chief's voice. Maybe that was just knowing I couldn't live with myself if I stopped." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness crept across the water. Finally, Thomas struggled to his feet, groaning slightly. Marcus stood quickly, offering his arm. This time, Thomas accepted it. "You're going to be a fine officer, Marcus," Thomas said as they walked toward the parking lot. "You learned something important. You learned that the uniform doesn't make you worthy. Your choices do. Your character does. How you treat people when they can't do anything for you, that's who you really are." Marcus helped Thomas into his old truck, making sure his cane was secured. "Thank you, sir, for everything, for forgiving me." Thomas shook his head. "Nothing to forgive, son. You're still becoming who you're meant to be. We all are, right up until the end. Just keep reaching for people who need it. That's all any of us can do." As Thomas drove away, Marcus stood in the parking lot, watching the taillights disappear. His phone buzzed with a message from Colonel Harrison. His latest community service evaluation. Exemplary progress. Recommended for leadership training. Marcus smiled, but the evaluation didn't feel like the victory he once would have imagined. The real victory was standing on that dock with Thomas, two men from different generations, connected by hard lessons and harder truths. He climbed into his own car and headed back to the academy, already planning next weekend's volunteer shift. There were people who needed help, and he was learning, finally, what it meant to reach for them.